Okay, Your Worship, we are live.
To move the Committee of the Whole meeting of the Cobourg Municipal Council on April the 6th through electronic participation pursuant to Procedure Bylaw Amendment 021-2020. And I'd like to call this meeting to order. Mr. Larmer, regarding agenda additions.
Sorry, Your Deputy Mayor.
Deputy Mayor, over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. There are a few additions to the agenda. There are 3 that are posted, and there are 3 that I would ask Council to consider. The 3 that are posted are as follows. 1, a memo from the Director of Planning and Development regarding an application for a site plan approval, 428-432 King Street East, Cobourg at Brook Road North, King and Brook Inc. King and Brookeast Inc. Architecture. 2, a memo from the Director of Public Works regarding the proposed reduction in transit service for the town of Cobourg. 3, a memo from the Director of Public Works regarding the town of Cobourg flood mitigation and sandbag policy, PW0PS1. And pursuant to Cobourg's procedural bylaw 11.3, I am proposing 3 additions to tonight's agenda for Council's consideration. 1, a discussion by Council regarding the cancellation of the Canada Day Parade and all related activities, and the closure of Victoria Beach immediately up until the end of July and beyond if necessary, by utilizing fencing to prevent any spread of the COVID-19 virus. 2, an update from Interim CAO Ian Davey on the status of all capital projects included in the 2020 budget as to what has been contracted to date, specifically work on the electrical upgrades at the marina, design and engineering for the East Pier, and work to be done at the waterfront. And 3, a discussion by Council regarding holding a special 2020 budget review meeting in early May 2020 to determine the status of revenues and expenses due to COVID-19 and what can be canceled, changed, or deferred to 2021 and beyond, to address the shortfall we will experience without a tax increase. The action recommended that the matters be added to the agenda.
Any discussion from members of council? Please use your hand if you wish to speak, rather than using the symbol. Seeing none, are there any disclosure of pecuniary interest?
Sorry, Your Worship, we have to vote on those additions.
Oh, sorry.
Agenda.
Yes, no discussion. I apologize. All those in favor? Looking through the screen, carried. Are there any disclosure of pecuniary interest, members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Larmer, back to you.
I'll go forward. Mayor.
Thank you.
The general government services. The first on there is your notice of motion regarding a Cobourg Municipal Council liaison representative to sit on the Transition House Emergency Shelter Board of Directors. The action recommended, whereas it would be vital to maintain and enhance open communication with the Transition House Board. Now therefore, that Councillor Beatty be appointed as Cobourg Council liaison representative with no voting privileges and attend monthly board meetings or additional meetings as determined by the board chair. Now therefore, it may be necessary to have an alternate Cobourg Council member attend Transition House Board meetings, that Councillor Adam Bureau be appointed as the alternate with no voting privileges. Now therefore, that the above Cobourg councillors can update members of Cobourg Council, senior staff, media, and the public through council agenda section XB11, council coordinator announcements, to ensure communications are being shared about relevant initiatives.
Perhaps if I lost some latitude through the deputy mayor, yes, I did put this forward as a notice of motion. I felt with the ongoing circumstances of Transition House, it would be important, certainly for our council, to have a liaison. In no way am I suggesting to this council that in any way we would take over the responsibilities of the upper tier, which belongs to Northumberland County, or in any way would take on any staffing related issues related to Transition House. I wish to make it clear at this point, there is no member at Northumberland County, either by way of council member or staff member, that sit directly. They do have a liaison that they can go to in terms of Miss Sarah Tanner, but that right now is the logistics for Transition House. I can tell you, in speaking with Marcia Jones, who is the chair of the board, she was very favorable, as was the board, to enable this to happen. Based on that, that's why the motion is now before you. So I will take any discussion from members of council on this one through the deputy mayor. So if you could go through the deputy mayor, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Are there any members of council that would like to ask a question or comment on this notice of motion by the mayor? Councillor Bureau. Unmute yourself.
I'm doing it.
Okay.
I think this is a good idea. I know that there's a lot of contentious issues between the transition house and a lot in the neighborhood. And I think this is a really good way for us to keep our thumb on the position of how the transition house is relating, how we can share that with the public. It is in our neighborhood, and it is with our community and our citizens. And I think this is a great idea in order to ensure that the board is doing the best it can and the transition house is doing the best it can. And what a better way than having a councillor go on that board and being able to share that with the public.
Thank you, Councillor Bureau. Anyone else? Councillor Shirley?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Mayor Henderson, I really appreciate your initiative in creating this position. And I agree entirely that Councillor Beatty is extremely qualified for this role. But I just want to be clear about jurisdictions. Yes, Transition House is located in the town of Cobourg, but it's also largely funded by the County of Northumberland. And as you mentioned, the county doesn't have a representative on the board. I'm just wondering that when you sit on county council and you are also the county's coordinator for the Community and Social Services Department, I'm just wondering if you're best placed to influence decisions about Transition House, and if you can explain why you haven't put yourself forward for this position.
Yes, Councillor Shirley, I'm happy to do that. I had a one-on-one meeting with Jennifer Moore, the CEO of Northumberland County. Put that fact forward. Ms. Moore was concerned if there were anything dealing with budget or any particular items that could maybe later on for me create a conflict of interest. And secondly, in terms of councillor positions, no council members are any type of transitional boards or other boards unless dictated to by regulation. So for example, even though I sit on the county, I sit on the housing corporation because that was dictated to by regulation. Similarly, I sit on the Kawartha Pine Ridge District Health Unit, again, because that was mandated by regulation. So when we follow through Jennifer Moore, the tradition or the history of Northumberland County, no council member sits on any other boards. So with that, and I had to also weigh the fact that within the health unit, I hope I announced this, maybe I didn't, but recently I was appointed vice chair of the Halliburton Kawartha Pine Ridge District Health Unit. And that comes obviously with more responsibilities. And I'm on approximately 2 more subcommittees because of that. So when I looked at the workload that I already have with the additional responsibilities, I felt it was prudent to ask other members of council. Based on that, I did make it known that I perhaps would move in this direction. And I had 2 councillors who indicated a strong interest in this endeavor. And based on that, I placed their names forward for your consideration.
Any follow-up, Councillor Shirley?
Yes, I do have a follow-up if no other member of council has a question. I'm just wondering that how will it work once a liaison is placed on the board? When that person comes back to Cobourg's council and provides a report, can you explain what action Cobourg Council can take pertaining to Transition House? And if we are not able to take any actions because it doesn't really fall within our jurisdiction, can you explain to the public what value this arrangement has?
Well, at this point, it's rather new. We've not had a liaison position in past. This is a new territory for all of us. I know similarly, the Cobourg Police Service have a representative, and if initiatives come back from the board where, for example, if I can use the Cobourg Police Services Board, they feel there's initiative within the board that they can assist, they take that to their board for consideration. I would like to think our two representatives could do actually the same thing, under the caveat that we do not want to duplicate services from the county. So in summary, the only way I'm going to learn is this benefit is to put our members on the board as a liaison representative and to see if it truly has merit. If it doesn't, then I would suggest a year from now, if it's not meeting the merit and the outcomes, then we can revisit what we're doing with Transition House.
If I can interrupt just for a moment, Mayor Henderson, then are you prepared to put that date and have this as a trial period on this motion?
Absolutely, I'm open to that because the reason I'm open to that, because as any new initiative, we want the initiative to work. So I'm happy to make an amendment that the liaison positions would be reviewed 1 year from, I guess, when it receives approval. In this case, that could be, I believe, April 20th. So that then would be April 20th, 2021.
Thank you. Are there any other members of council? I have a few comments, but I will wait till the rest of council speaks before I give my thoughts. Not seeing it. Oh, Councillor Bureau. Go ahead.
Sorry, I keep clicking the microphone instead of the unmute. Also, because there is no county representative on that board, and this is such a pretentious issue to our citizens, I just think it's so important that we have our finger on everything that affects our people. So to me, this is such a good way in order to share the information, the right information to our citizens as well in this. And I think that's super important. And that's my comments.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Bureau. I guess when I read this, and oh, sorry, Councillor Choi.
Thank you. And just to follow up on Councillor Bureau's comments, I'd like to know specifically how will this position help to address, for example, some of the concerns that were raised by Cobourg residents about the impact of Transition House's operation as a low barrier shelter. We did receive a delegation from the Good Neighbours Coalition last November. I'm aware that their concerns still have not been addressed. So I'm just wondering, Mayor Henderson, if you could explain specifically how this arrangement, do you think it will help to address some of those citizen concerns, and how will it work? How will Cobourg Council be able to take action to address those concerns?
Well, Councillor Shirley, in all due respect, this is so new. I just know if we have someone there with consistent communication, we can hear of it and perhaps deal with it in-house if possible, or through council, and we can be proactive in our decisions. It will put us in a much better place, since it is located within our town, than reacting to the outcomes that perhaps the neighborhoods are facing. So in this sense, I see we would get the information firsthand, and as indicated by Councillor Burrow, more importantly, we'd perhaps get accurate information, which is more important. Because right now, I can assure you, I do not get their information from the board meetings. I don't always get the information from Transition House because it's an independent board. But in the fact that Transition House was open to this arrangement, I think speaks volumes.
Any follow-up, Councillor Shirley?
No, but thank you for the clarification.
I guess my concerns are that this is a liaison. We're not going to be a voting member, which thank goodness we aren't. They came to community grants this year and asked for $11,000. It was basically to offset utility bills, I believe. And my concern is we are not financing Transition House. We never have, and hopefully now we never will. There are several organizations in town, Cornerstone, the Food Bank, there are hundreds of organizations in town. And for some reason, you have chosen to want to have a delegate to sit on this board that we do not finance, that we do not have any authority over. And I just have real problems with it. I'm probably the only member of this council that does, but I will definitely be voting against this motion. And I would ask the clerk to have a recorded vote on this, because it's that important to me that we look at this seriously and what precedent we are now going to be setting for getting involved in other people's committees, in other people's business, basically. Yes, there's a lot going on right now in this town, and us sitting on a board and having, we don't have a voice at the table because we don't have a vote at the table. And I just don't see the purpose of this at all. Are there any other questions? No? Oh, Councillor Beatty?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you for outlining your concerns. I was just waiting for all of Council to speak because I appreciate my name being put forward for this liaison position. I do understand that if this position had any leeway in voting, which it clearly does not and is clearly stated, then I think we would have concerns. I think a liaison or a representative to build that community relationship with an important stakeholder across community well-being in the town of Cobourg. But really my point is when the mayor asked my interest in this, I naturally thought not even so much my background in this work, but more importantly through the lens of my role as coordinator of planning and development, as we enter a new era of an intersection between social planning and urban planning, predominantly through our CIP and affordable housing. What we heard from those stakeholders, and Transition House is a key member of the Affordable Housing Committee, which has been heavily informing our affordable housing side of things. I think that not only will we benefit from the concerns of citizens in the Transition House neighborhood, but I think it quite politely and strategically aligns with the people and the partnership components of our strategic plan that are set out for this term of council.
Okay. Any other questions, Councillor Dowding?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate your concerns, Deputy Mayor, and I think they are valid in a way. But as we are suggesting this is a one-year trial period, I'm willing to work with it and see if we can't iron out some of the issues. Nothing says that we have to keep that liaison person on there after the one-year period, and it is a volunteer, basically a volunteer position from council's perspective. So I'm willing to allow it to go for 1 year and assess it a year from now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none. Oh, sorry, Councillor Shirley. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking I still have some concerns that although information sharing is valuable, I have concerns that as a council, we do not have the authority or ability to act on any of that information that's fed back to us. The responsibility lies with the County of Northumberland. But as Councillor Darling has said, this is being proposed as a one-year trial. I could support a one-year trial, but I am still concerned about, as a council, as a Cobourg council, we haven't yet addressed the concerns of the Good Neighbours Coalition. So I would like to propose an amendment, and it would be an addition, and it would be, and further that Councillor Beatty brings recommended actions to council after meeting with the Transition House Board and members of the local residents group known as the Good Neighbours Coalition. And my desire here is really just to move that forward and address those concerns as a priority. Use the liaison position to try and address those concerns and bring that information back to council.
Thank you, Councillor Shirley. Anybody want her to reread her amendment? Seeing not, I will basically, Mr. Larmer, I will go back to the original motion for the recorded vote, but for this amendment, if that's okay, do we need a recorded vote on both? Okay, so.
Just also, we just need to move that other amendment that was on the floor by the mayor on the timeline. You really haven't done that yet either, so we should deal with Councillor Chorley's first, then go back to the mayor's.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to be voting on Councillor Chorley's amendment. Basically, if no one needs it reread, it's just so Councillor Beatty can bring back. Because my concern was that the mayor also mentioned quickly that he would, you know, either do this in-house or bring it to council. So I'm thankful for that amendment, Councillor Chorley, so we get everything that we need to hear brought to council, not done in-house. So I'm going to call the vote on, oh, sorry.
Madam Chair, does you mind if I can get that amendment read again?
Absolutely.
If I missed it, I think the public should hear it too, sorry.
Councillor Shirley, would you mind reading that again, please?
Certainly. And further that Councillor Beatty bring recommended actions to council after meeting with the Transition House Board and members of the local residents group known as the Good Neighbours Coalition.
Did you get that? Okay, Councillor Bureau.
Through you to Councillor Chorley, can you be a little more specific? Are you asking for Councillor Beatty to go to the Good Neighbours Coalition, get recommendations from there, go to the Transition House, get recommendations from there, and then bring them back to council? Or are you saying bring the Good Neighbour Coalition's recommendations to the Transition House Board?
Councillor Shirley? Okay.
The motion was to use the liaison position to have a conversation with the Transition House Board, have a conversation with the representatives of the Good Neighbours Coalition, and then for Councillor Beatty to form her own recommendations and bring those recommendations to council. If we're going to have a liaison position, I would really like it to be a mediator and to be able to get information from the board and from the citizens and bring some recommendations to council so that we can move forward in a constructive way.
Is that clear, Councillor Bureau?
Yeah, can I follow up?
Sure.
But I don't think Councillor Beatty is in that position to do that. And I don't think that this is what this role is about. This role is to bring information back from the Transition House Board to clarify to council, or to have council direct a letter or something to the county if there is any issues or problems. There was a lot of misinformation that happened throughout the year on this board and through the Goodwill or Good Neighbor Coalition. So this was more of a clarification and to make sure that everything was running properly and to let this council know on what is actually happening at the house and on the board.
Councillor Beatty and then Councillor Shirley.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And thank you, Councillor Bureau, because a segue into my, I don't know if it's a comment or a question to Councillor Chorley. I absolutely hear the spirit in which I think you're trying to, the objective of the amendment. And I'm obviously happy to do whatever roles and duties that are within that scope of the liaison role. I think I'm a bit hesitant. It's not a concern. I think I'm a bit hesitant for a few reasons. From what I've been hearing from other councillors, is that liaison, are we adding a layer of influence there, which I want to make sure we delicately don't cross. A governance point of view, can't speak for Transition House Board, but I feel that that would have to be an item either received or initiated by the Transition House as well, or an informal conversation. Keeping in mind that as a liaison, I have no authority to add an item to their board agenda, unless their bylaws indicate otherwise. And then finally, just to circle back to, I think we can have as many internal or external or liaison conversations we want with Transition House and the Good Neighbors Coalition. And I respect where both are coming from. But without that liaison and communication from the county as well, because ultimately, you know, we've just come full circle. The county is it's their jurisdiction in terms of funding and mandate. So I think I can bring recommendations back till the sun sets. But I think we'd have to have that liaison with the county as well, or perhaps Councillor Chorley, if you consider adding what would be done with the outcome of these recommendations, like where would council send these recommendations from there?
Councillor Shirley?
I think if this liaison position can't bring tangible recommendations to council, something that's actionable, then there isn't any utility in the position. And even if that action is only a recommendation that this council sends a letter to the county council with specific requests, if that's the only action we can take, at least that is some kind of recommended action. That's actually the only action that I can imagine we can take as a council. But if that can't happen, then I don't understand what the utility is of this position. Liaising and sharing information is nice, but if it doesn't give us any kind of result, then it might not be the best use of time.
Councillor Bureau?
I totally understand what you're saying, Councillor Chorley. But my biggest thing is the residents of Cobourg. So if they're concerned and we have a way to find out, to ease their concerns or to find out actually what's happening, I think that's our duty to do that. I think we owe it to our citizens. This is Councillor Darling's right, this is a volunteer position. Councillor Beatty is willing to give up her time to make sure that this controversial issue has council's attention and the citizens' best interest in mind. So, and I understand about the financing, about how we did give them a community grant. There's no way we'd be financing this at all. There's no way we would be doing anything like that. This is a way to have our citizens' mind at ease so that we can pass on information to council, make any recommendations to the county council that Councillor Beatty sees fit, or the councilor, or that our council sees fit. And it's a trial period. They may not work, but I think we owe it to our citizens to at least information share. I think that's an important part of our jobs, to be honest with you.
Thank you, Councillor Bureau. Just to follow up on that, I did also have 2 meetings with CAO Jennifer Moore, and I asked her, you know, the citizens of Cobourg are also the citizens of Northumberland County. And I asked her, how long can you recall a member of Northumberland County ever taking the time to even sit in on one of these transition house boards? And she said maybe once a few years ago, but I can't remember what the meeting was. So we all have 7 communities that sit on Northumberland County, and our mayor is our representative there. And he also sits on community services. And yet, in all those years, the CAO could not think of one instance. So citizens are citizens, and they belong to Northumberland County, they belong to us. And again, I just think we're getting involved in a situation where this is a county initiative. This is a county board. This is a county funded initiative. And, you know, I'm thankful that we've added a year on this. I'm still voting against it. But I think we have enough on our plate right now. We have more than enough on our plate right now. And I just can't believe this is even being brought to us. Councillor Beatty?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And just, I think too, it's important to clarify, Transition House isn't a county board. The board is its own legal entity incorporated as a registered nonprofit and charity through the Transition House. They're funded predominantly by the county. So I think it's just important for the public listening to understand that Transition House is not a board of the county. It's its own independent governed board.
Thank you, Councillor Beatty, for that clarification. I did know that. I apologize for making that assumption. Okay, we have Councillor Shirley's motion amendment on the floor, and I think I'll call that vote now if no one else has anything to say on Councillor Shirley's amendment. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Against? Motion's defeated. Going back to Mayor Henderson's amendment to for this motion to be reviewed after 1 year from the final vote, which I'm assuming will be at our next council meeting. Any more discussion on that? Okay, I'll call the vote on Mayor Henderson's amendment. All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. And now, Mr. Larmer, if you would bring us through a recorded vote on the action as is with the amendment from Mayor Henderson for this to be reviewed after 1 year.
Sorry, so make sure I'm unmuted. Okay, so recorded vote on general government item number 1 as requested by Deputy Mayor Sagan. So I'm just going to read the procedural bylaw section 23, where a vote is required to be recorded by law or request of a member immediately prior to subsequent to taking of the vote. Each member that is both present and qualified to vote shall announce his or her vote openly, and any failure to vote by a member who is not qualified shall be deemed to be in the negative vote. Clerk shall record each vote in alphabetical order. When a member present requests a recorded vote, all members present at the council or committee meeting must vote in alphabetical order unless otherwise provided by statute. The names of those who voted for and the names of those who voted against shall be named in the minutes of the applicable meeting. The mayor will announce, or the presiding officer, chair being deputy mayor, will announce the results. So Councillor Beatty.
4.
Councillor Burkett.
4.
Sorry, I apologize. Can you say that again?
4.
Councillor Adam Bureau.
4.
Councillor Emily Chorley.
Against.
Councillor Brian Darling.
4.
Mayor John Henderson.
4.
Deputy Mayor Suzanne Sagan.
Against.
So 5-2, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Larmer. The vote is carried 5-2, and we'll proceed to the next council meeting. Okay, following with the 3 additions that we voted to add to the agenda this evening. The first is, are you going to put them up, Mr. Larmer?
Yeah, I'm going to attempt to. Just give me 1 second. I apologize.
No problem.
It's not right. I apologize.
I sent them, no, I didn't send the motions, but everyone has the items in front of them.
Just give me 1 second. I apologize.
Okay.
That should be it.
Thank you very much. It's moved by myself that in the action recommended that the Canada Day Parade on July 1st, 2020 and all related activities be canceled, and further that Victoria Beach be closed immediately up until the end of July COVID-19 virus. I'll take any questions from members of council.
Deputy Mayor, you need a seconder?
No, I don't. It's
Oh,
a
sorry.
committee of the whole.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, apologize.
Councillor Darling?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. As for the discussion on the July 1st parade, I think that makes good sense. It's going to be very difficult. This issue with COVID is going to go on for some time. And I would be in favor of canceling the Canada Day parade. As for fencing the park, I don't know if I'm really in favor of that or not, or the beach. We have the laws out there passed down from the province under the emergency situation. The only thing that people can do these days is walk in pairs or in families. And I myself have been walking the waterfront numerous times and found that there's a lot of people that are walking the waterfront. They walk the beach, the Harbour, the West Beach. So there's lots of people there. People are almost feel like they're imprisoned in their home now, and to put fencing around a nice open area like the beach just seems to add like you're adding prison walls. So I'm not in favor. This is almost a two-part motion. I am in favor of the Canada Day cancellation of the parade, but I'm not in favor of fencing the beach area. The police and the bylaw officers have their job to do, and if people do start to congregate down there, then I think that the province can use the revenues with the cost of this COVID from the fines that will be levied. Thank you.
Just before I go to you, Councillor Beatty, I'm not in favor of this either. I just basically was looking forward to July when thousands from Toronto come down as they do every year. They have to get out of Toronto. This is where they come. That was really the only reason for putting this forward. I mean, no one wants a fence around our beach for sure, especially me. Councillor Beatty?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'd like to put a motion to divide then, because I share Councillor Darling's sentiment, and I feel that both assets should be discussed and possibly voted on separately. So my motion would be to divide the, my apologies, possibly through you, Deputy Mayor, to the clerk, the wording for the motion to divide. Mr. Larmer, if you can remind me. So do I have to state the portion of the motion I'd like to divide, or just a motion to divide the two items into two?
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Okay, then that's my motion to divide.
Okay, that makes sense. All in favor? Oh, sorry, any more? No, okay, all in favor for the motion to divide? Okay, that's carried. Any further conversation? Mayor Henderson?
So at this point, I'm making the assumption we're on number 1 about the dealing with the Canada Day parade. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. At this point, the only comment I can make, I do want to compliment the emergency control group, which was put into place both with the provincial emergency order, as well as myself on behalf of council declaring a local emergency. I can tell you in that team performance that we meet every day, Monday through Friday, we do weigh community activities in alignment where the health unit is going in. Typically, if you follow the health unit, a lot of the regulations follow generally 14-day periods. In other words, after 14 days, the Premier or Dr. David Williams will review the focus not only for themselves, but for the province of Ontario. So one consideration, you can obviously choose as council to make your own decision, but my question is, all these other decisions have been made collectively and proactively by the emergency control group, and I'm just wondering why at this point you would not allow them to do the same.
As this is my motion, frankly, I feel we've been felt left out. I know we get your nightly briefings, but I think this is important enough that council needs to have a discussion, which we are now having, and a vote. We are all elected members of this council, and I believe strongly that we need a say. And as we don't sit around that table, your emergency control group, we are not privy to anything that happens there. So I think this will continue with information that we feel we need to discuss as a council. That was the reason for bringing it forward. Mayor Henderson.
I'm going to take a point of order with you, Deputy Mayor, in your comment that you say you're not kept abreast of the items. I have to tell you, I've been working diligently as mayor since you first requested mayor highlights. To my knowledge, ever since you've made that request, I've been doing that. And I've been giving you the summary that I have checked both from Shannon Murphy as well as Mr. Davey, our interim CO, daily, Monday through Friday, and if need be on weekends. And I've also made sure that anytime I receive a press release from the federal, provincial, or health units, I've been sending them to all members of council as I receive them. So I do take exception to your comments.
Fair enough. Thank you. Councillor Bureau.
I want to thank you, Your Worship, with this committee so far. It's been doing its job. It's been doing well. One of the problems, I think, or the frustrations for councillors or myself, I can't speak for everybody else, is that we don't know any future plans. So in this council, all we do is future plan. We future plan for events, we future plan for tourism, planning, parks and rec, public works, the police, but there is no future plans. So I think I understand you may have been taken back by that comment, but we just don't know what's going on. And we have a lot of people asking us, well, is this happening? This is, and we have no answers to give them. The updates every night is great. I think it's wonderful. It gives us a nice recap of what has happened. So I think that's part of our frustration, is that we don't understand the future, or you see what I'm saying on that?
Well, with all due respect, Councillor Barreau, sometimes we don't know quite what the future is either until it comes down through a health regulation or public health or the premier or federally or provincially. We work with those issues as they're delivered to us under emergency situations, and then we act accordingly to make sure that information gets out to all members of council as well as the public. So again, your comments well taken, but again, even we don't know under these circumstances what's going to happen 30 days from today.
Any other Councillor Burkett?
I have no problem with the first part of the motion there in regards to the event of the parade. As for the second one, I will share with the rest of council that I did ask his worship after he sent out one of his emails what we were doing with particular operations and whether the group was looking into them. He did advise me at that point that they were looking into those and what would come forward. So I believe, as far as I'm concerned, his worship and the group are doing an excellent job. I believe they are updating us on a regular basis. And I do believe that if citizens wish to have questions answered, I think other members of council should direct them to whether it's their social media or our website, because I believe that everything is getting updated through communications and his worship there.
Thanks for Councillor Burkett. Mr. Larmer?
So just a reminder, the motion's divided, so we need to have the first motion on the floor for discussion only, just to let council members know that.
I was just about to say that. Thank you. Any other conversation or questions on the first part of the motion? Seeing none, I will call a vote on the first one, which is basically, I'll reread it again, that Canada Day Parade on July 1st, 2020 and all related activities be cancelled. All in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. The second motion, that Victoria Beach be closed immediately up until the end of July and beyond if necessary by utilizing fencing to prevent any spread of the COVID-19 virus. Any further discussion? Councillor Bureau, followed by Mayor Henderson, followed by Nicole Beatty. Councillor Beatty, my apologies. So Councillor Bureau, you're first.
Yeah, I do understand that the emergency control group may be looking at this through the prior comments. And I do understand what Councillor Darling's saying about we have police and bylaw, but do you not think that it would be better if we did fence it off and it would save the amount of work that the police and the bylaw are doing? They're busy in the community doing tons of other stuff. To be patrolling the beach on a regular basis, I think that might be overworking the staff. I would also like to get the police recommendations on that as well, from either the police board or the chief himself.
Thank you, Councillor Bureau. We certainly have a week between tonight's meeting and the final vote on this, if this does pass, to get that report from the police. Mayor Henderson, you're next, followed by Councillor Beatty.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just want to ensure that only today did I send to council members a enforcement that started in effect just this past Sunday from the Cobra Police Service. So to answer Councillor Burrell's question, we're just starting again to remind citizens of the role about social distancing, keeping less than groups of 5, honoring the conditions of the Ontario Public Health Regulation, and only now are we starting enforcement. To date, we've fined 2 citizens, and the fines are not little. As you know, they start at $750. But before we start panicking into fences, I'd very much like to see what the metrics are, what the issues are, how they come forward to the emergency control group, so we can actually get a read on how significant of an issue is this. The reason I say that, because right now from my parameters, as I'm out, I would have to say that the large majority of citizens in Cobourg are abiding by the recommendations of the Public Health Unit and are doing exactly what we're asking them to do. So perhaps of courtesy of this, we could ask the emergency control group to measure. We could also ask them to do some estimation of what fencing would be, because the question is, are we talking winter snow fence, or are we talking the kind of fencing that's normally put at the waterfront festival? Because those questions could be answered through the emergency control group.
Thank you, Mayor Henderson. Councillor Beatty.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I do have 3 questions, but I'll do each one. I just wanted to let you know I had 3, but I appreciate I'll have to pause after each to allow other members to ask. If not, with your permission, I'll just go from question to question. I think my first is a point of clarification, or maybe just a verbal reminder through you, Deputy Mayor, to you, Your Worship. March 31st, the provincial order came out about the closure of parks and physical recreational amenities. The town then followed suit with its own communique reiterating that. And in that order or communication included beaches, but that passing through or way through and walking was still acceptable in parks and the beach. Can you just quickly, maybe for those that are listening or who will tune into this afterwards, the difference with that order of people just walking through on the boardwalk and walking through on the beach versus those gathering to, I've seen people playing volleyball and golf and picnicking, or just sitting on their own and reading on the beach. Can you just maybe clarify for listeners the difference between following through, like walking through public spaces versus either idling or participating in activity?
I'm happy to do so, Councillor Beatty, but I also might want to get a comment from our CO, Mr. Davey, as well. We know that all recreational areas in the province of Ontario are in effect closed. We felt, because as Councillor Darlene was saying, we are rather restricted to our homes, and that's the main message we want to deliver. But we know that there are citizens who like to get out for a breath of fresh air, again, following social distancing, being less in groups of 5. We thought we could honor that through the emergency control group As long as the citizens honor those rules and we're moving through an area, whether that be the beach, the West Promenade, the boardwalk, Victoria Park, as long as they honored the movement aspect, moving from point A to point B, we felt that was acceptable. To your point, the moment they pull up a lawn chair, are playing golf, or having a picnic, that is voiding the provincial regulations, and as such, that it would be deemed non-compliance, and therefore those individuals under the Act, starting today, could be charged $750 fine. Mr. Davey, if you wish to comment further.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I think up until this point, the direction coming from the province has definitely been to law enforcement and by law enforcement has been to educate the public, basically be proactive in terms of asking people to move along and not take part in those activities. And I think now we're entering the next phase of that, where if people are seen to be abusing that, then the next step, as has started now, is to start to issue the fines. You know, so I think as we monitor it going through the rest of this week and into the weekend, if it continues that there's an issue that either law enforcement or by law enforcement feel they can't keep up to or something, then yeah, at that point, I would compare it to the when we took the initiative a week or so ago to close the dog park. For a time being, it was believed that you know, there wasn't an issue with the dog park, and then repeatedly we found that people were congregating in the parking lots, visiting, and basically you know, gathering at social gatherings in groups larger than was acceptable. So the decision was made to close the dog park. Similar to the county of Northumberland closed the hiking trails. Again, the issue was that people were congregating in the parking lot in larger groups than was acceptable. And so the decision was made to you know, close the trails to solve that problem. So I think that this is certainly an issue that we've been following and we've had lots of discussions about. And I think at this point in time, both the Chief of Police and Mr. Larmer are confident that they can deal with these issues. Issues like fishermen along the creek standing in one spot won't be allowed. And again, there'll be a difference between a senior, let's say, who has to stop partway through a walk and have a rest on the park bench, as opposed to people that pull out a blanket and a picnic basket and settle in for an hour or two. That's a totally different issue. So in that, as recent as this morning, that was the discussion that took place.
Thank you, Mr. Davey. Before I go back to you, Councillor Beatty, just a quick question. If, for example, next weekend, a group from Toronto or outlying area come to have a picnic on our beach, the big signs that were recently erected on social distancing do not clarify, and there's been a lot of chatter on social media that it's confusing for the citizens of Cobourg as to what it is they actually can and can't do. Can they walk through? Can they, you know, and there has been some chatter there. So if we get a group of a family from Toronto coming in who have no idea what we're doing here, and they know we have this beautiful beach and it's a beautiful sun, you know, I mean, it probably won't happen next weekend because it's still April, but do each of those members of that family get a fine of $750? And do they get just basically move on and we can't allow you to stay here? So maybe Mr. Davey, if you could clarify that, please.
Yes, Deputy Mayor, I would suggest that in that case, logic would maybe dictate that if it's obviously a family situation, that maybe one person is issued a ticket and not, you know, if not each individual in the family. Certainly, the indication, you know, that we're not, law enforcement is certainly not going to be out to, you know, ticket younger people, especially children, you know, but yeah, that is the direction right now, that people, people will be issued these fines.
Just to follow up, will there be signage then, basically indicating to people who are thinking of visiting our beach that that is the case? Right now, it does not indicate that it's anything but just stay apart and practice social distancing. So will that be, or will the first instant be just a warning? Mr. Davey, please.
I'm not sure exactly what the position will be on that, and I'm not exactly sure what additional signage needs to be put in place to make that point to people. Like, I think it's been very well publicized that parks themselves are not closed in the sense that people can't walk through them. So I think that's been very well publicized, that walking across the beach, across the boardwalk, and across through a park is perfectly acceptable. So
I guess the reason I ask is I live.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor, I would encourage you to go back to Councillor Beatty as she had 3 questions on the floor.
I will, Mayor Henderson. I'm just resolving this one first. Just one more comment. We live next to Dunnigan Park, and you've got signs there, and you've got security tape, and people go underneath there. They've been playing volleyball. They've been going into the skateboard park. So all the education you refer to, and of course, many of us watch TV every day. So I won't go back to you, Councillor, Mr. Davey, but there are people that do abuse, even with all the education that's out there. Okay, Councillor Beatty, you had a second question.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and I actually think it can be the same question, but I do want to acknowledge the conversation that's happening. And I applaud, it's just not visitors coming to our beach. We have local residents who are not obeying the orders and social distancing, and then we have visitors that do, and vice versa. And it pangs me because for everyone doing it right, there's someone who's, taking that away from someone. And as someone who, my motto is when in doubt, walk it out. And I spend every morning, like many of us, walking to the water's edge. And taking in, the Harbour is past Councillor Darling and his lovely wife the other day. Like, it's just part of our rhythm as Cobourg citizens. That being said, my question is around the selection of, to you, Deputy Mayor, the selection of just Victoria Beach, and I truly do appreciate the intention of this motion. The selection of just Victoria Beach and the date. Today, it was announced that the marina, the campground, and the boat launch will all be closed until, I believe, May 27th, May 29th, a date in May. Is there a reason why this closure wasn't aligned with that date to do a fulsome review of all waterfront public assets, public spaces? And then also, if Victoria Beach, what's with people not then directing that traffic and socialization to the West Beach? So why one beach over the other? So why one beach over the other, and then the consideration of bringing up the closure date to the fencing date to May 27th to align with the announcement today of the other 3 public spaces that are closed until then?
I think that's an excellent observation, Councillor Beatty, and basically, I was just trying to protect our citizens. We noticed that there were people outside of CCI the other day in groups, and basically they had nowhere to go. And yes, they're monitored when they go into CCI, but I mean, what's the sense of making sure you've got one rule inside and one rule outside? I would certainly, after this conversation is concluded on this motion, be willing to align that with the end of May so that all waterfront activities, and that would also give us some time. And certainly April, May are not hot beach areas. So certainly if we did it for the end of May, that would hopefully have June, July, and August. And if we find that a lot of people are coming, then maybe that might be the date. So I could certainly make that amendment putting forward. I think it was May 29th or May 27th. I can't remember. Any other conversation, any comments before I make that? Councillor Shirley?
Yeah, thank you. At this stage, I'm very reticent to see any kind of fencing go up around the beach. But I do feel that much better signage is needed in our high use parks. Walking through the parks with my family, I myself feel confused on the do's and the don'ts, what is allowed and what is not permitted at this time. And because rules and regulations, they're coming out from the province, they are changing. Not everyone is able to stay abreast of them. I think we need that guidance well posted on site so that as people walk through parks, they know what they can and cannot do. I'd like to see that take place as a first step before any kind of fencing takes place. And unfortunately, there is still confusion about whether our parks are open or closed. And the police, the Cobourg police released a press release today, which added to my confusion because the press release states that the parks are closed. So we need to be careful about that messaging. I'm still concerned about the mental health impacts of the coronavirus pandemic and being bottled up in our homes. So where people are allowed to safely be outdoors, I think we have an obligation to convey that and allow that to take place, and obviously still encourage people to predominantly stay at home.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. Councillor Burkett, followed by Mayor Henderson.
Back to Ian's point there, I believe currently, as he stated, the municipal clerk has it under control with bylaw, and I know that we've got a lot more foot patrol with special constables and auxiliaries through those areas. So at this time, I don't think the fence is necessary. I do think we just need to continue to monitor the situation through those two channels.
Mayor Henderson, you were next.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. At this point, I would concur with Councillor Chorley's comments. I don't need to repeat them. They were clear. I believe if the ECG, the Emergency Control Group, can take to heart about the message and signage in parks to bring another step of clarity would be important. Again, through our team efforts, through the police, the bylaw officers, we can measure what the actual outcomes are and what situations they're dealing with. And if we felt there was certainly a need to proceed to fencing as another step forward to keep everyone safe, then I would expect the committee to make that kind of decision. So in essence, if we follow Councillor Chorley's statement, I think it's a sensible one. It puts us on good footing at the beginning, and we can still measure where it takes us at the end.
Oh, Mr. Davey?
I was just, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I was just going to say, perhaps Mr. Larmer could comment on the laws that as they're being enforced now, and just the whole issue of what social distancing means and whether that is or is not covered in the provincial laws that have been passed to date.
Mr. Larmer?
Just to start, currently there's about 24 orders from the government of the EMPCA, so the Emergency Civil Protection Act, Management Civil Protection Act. These are changing all the time. They're getting updated, they're mending. The one that we're talking about specifically is provincial legislation that's out, which defines recreational amenities. Does not speak to green open spaces, or that. It's a definition that has a number of different items underneath it, which if council would like, I can explain it to them. And then there's one exemption at the very end of 4 that says if they're not otherwise closed to citizens, and they do not contain recreational amenities, they can be used as a thoroughway to be moved out to walk, to have a stroll, but you can't stop and use those areas. I just want to make it very clear that any enforcement, whether it's done by the police, by us, by fire, by conservation authorities, these are all inclusive. They go beyond this jurisdiction of just residents of Cobourg. If we see an individual in the park, it doesn't matter if they're a Cobourg citizen, they're a Hamilton Township citizen, or a Toronto citizen. We do not card individuals. We base it on the infraction or what's happening in the time. So it doesn't matter who you are. If you're against the law or not abiding by the rules, then we'll issue the fine or we'll do the investigation and speak with those members. Currently right now working with the police. This weekend was a bit busy. And what I think is that Not us. We've been following a lot of the provincial orders. I think it's a bit confusing on the province's side of it regarding this because, for example, this outdoor recreational amenities regulation that was put in, I believe last Saturday the government made a press release, an announcement on this before we got it or before any police or through the Solicitor General's office. The regulation was not approved and in written form for us to enforce until Wednesday that week. So this is how this is fluctuating. So to make sure that we were preempted and going with the province, we acted right away and waited for that province initiative and regulation to come out. If I just want to maybe clarify, and maybe if the public are here, if you give me some time, I can read the regulation. So regulation 014-20 speaks to closures of what an outdoor recreational amenity is. The following is a recreational amenity described and defined in the regulation as set out under the Emergency Management Civil Protection Act. 1, all outdoor playgrounds, play structures and equipments. Number 2, all outdoor sports facilities and multi-use fields, including baseball diamonds, soccer fields, frisbee golf location, tennis, platform tennis, table tennis, and pickleball courts, basketball courts, BMX parks, and skate parks. Number 3, all off-leash dog parks. Number 4, all portions of park and recreational areas containing outdoor fitness equipment. Number 5, all outdoor allotment gardens and community gardens. And number 6, all outdoor picnic sites, benches, and shelters in parks and recreational areas. Then item number 2 says outdoor recreational amenities that are intended for use by more than one family are closed, regardless of whether they are publicly or privately owned and regardless of whether they are attached to a park system. Number 3, no person shall enter or use an outdoor recreation amenity as described in subsection 2, which I just defined all for you, what's encompassing that's set out by the government, except for a maintenance, safety, law enforcement, or similar purpose. And this might be the confusing part for people. This is subsection 4. It says, for greater certainty, nothing in this order precludes individuals from walking through or using portions of park and recreational areas that are not otherwise closed and do not contain an outdoor recreational amenity described in subsection 2. So for an example, beach is not described as a recreational amenity that's defined in here. We call it Victoria Park Beach. So it is not closed, not mandated by closed by the provincial government. But what it says, it does contain a recreational amenity, right? Which is a recreational facility like swimming as well as volleyball courts or what we can use as recreational. So it's saying that there's nothing against people walking through. Just like Peace Park or another park with a shelter, for example, Victoria Park to walk through at the trails. Even our boardwalk is not closed. It allows people to walk through. I think another important part is the social distancing aspect. This public health is 2 meters from individuals. This is not against the law. Social distancing is a recommendation for public health. Something that us and the Cobourg Police Services are looking at is maybe monitoring this for the next 3 days to see how people are doing and how people are making sure they're not utilizing these facilities or these recreational amenities and going through parks kind of briskly. That we may have to bring a bylaw to council at the local level, similar to what City of Toronto has done, what City of Brampton has done, some other municipalities in regards to actual social distancing. So we see 2 people, 3 people under the 5 that are not social distancing, we can actually issue fines for them for that. So that would be a decision of council, but we're going to monitor that and get that information back to here in case we have to move that direction. Regarding the Victoria Park, if you do close the beach, in bylaw enforcement, I'm sorry I'm going long-winded, but some people seem to not always obey fencing. They seem to hop over. We have a lot of problems with that when other parks are closed and different things. So I think signage is a good thing to say. This park is closed very brightly. And then we have the authority under bylaw enforcement police services to issue Trespass to Property Act, which is a lot easier to enforce than just, barricading the area, which could be probably jumped over anyway. So I hope I answered your questions for that. It is a bit confusing governance, but we're not doing anything differently. We're just trying to really understand exactly what they're trying to accomplish with these orders and going one step further. And we've kind of been ahead of the province every time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Larmer. I really appreciate that. And part of the reason that I wanted to bring this to council is to have this kind of discussion and clarity. Councillor Shirley, you had your hand up.
Yeah, first of all, thank you to Mr. Larmer for that clarification. It's very helpful. I think it's notable that the province is trying to strike a balance between allowing and even encouraging physical activity, walking and moving, but making a distinction from hanging out and trying to discourage hanging out in public spaces. I just wanted to ask a question about Cobourg Conservation Area. When I went there with my family recently, I was surprised to see it was closed, and there's a notice from both the GRCA and the town of Cobourg posted there. And I thought it was my understanding that conservation areas would remain open under the Ontario order unless they were previously closed. So I'm just wondering, for transparency and my own understanding, could we have an explanation of how the Cobourg Conservation Area came to be closed so that people can't even walk through there now?
Mr. Larmer?
So we can kind of consider the conservation area its own entity and authority. So any land that they own and that they regulate and they maintain, and they can go above and beyond the provincial order. Even without the order, they can close a park if they see fit. So I think that was a decision of the actual board or those employees there to close that for various reasons. But you can go above and beyond this provincial order if you wish to. You just can't go back. You just can't open it up against the provincial order. So, for example, for us, if they say no using playgrounds or outdoor spaces, you can say, no, we're going to allow that. Jump on there and play. That's not allowed, but you can one-up them. That might be what's happening there.
Okay, I think we've had a good discussion. Mayor Henderson?
Yeah, just to Councillor Troy, I don't know if this is helpful. In federal parkland, of course, they closed all federal parkland in Canada, but with no date decided. Provincially, if I'm not mistaken, I think the date provincially for all conservation in parks, the province selected the date of April 31st. So I can't guarantee that's the date that the GRCA or the Board of the Conservation may have used. I know that's a date in other provincial parks, if that's helpful.
Councillor Beatty, did you have a third question?
No, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I rolled my two questions into my one.
Okay, thank you. We've had a really good discussion, and based on what we've heard, and I'm willing to withdraw the second part of this motion and to reconsider it at the end of May when we have further information in front of us. So, Mr. Larmer, if you could do that, please, for me. Okay, moving on. The second addition moved by myself was the action recommended that council receive an update from interim CAO Ian Davey on the status of all capital projects included in the 2020 budget as to what has been contracted to date, specifically work on the electrical upgrades at the marina, design and engineering at the East Pier, and work to be done at the waterfront. Mr. Davey, can I direct that to you, please?
Yes, Deputy Mayor. So what I will do is late this afternoon, I did ask the directors to take a quick look at their capital budgets as well and be prepared to speak on the bigger ticket items within their budgets. What I can, before I do that, what I can tell you is that as a group, the directors are also meeting on a daily basis. And one of the things that we've been discussing in our recent meetings late last week and again today was to start that process of reviewing the budgets to be able to come back with twofold. One, to come up with a analysis or projection of where we think the revenue shortfalls might come, where they might come to. Of course, that's hard to do when, again, we can't predict when this situation is going to normalize, whether that be July 1st or whether it be September 1st or through the rest of the year. So it's a little bit hard, but that's what we're looking at now, is to come up with some of those projections and a list of suggestions to bring back to council. In terms of the capital projects, again, we need to be aware that not all of those projects, some of them are funded through things like gas tax, federal gas tax, specific grants from the province. We've had no indication that any of those funds are not going to continue to be received. So canceling those type of projects really is not going to do anything to help our financial situation or our financial shortfall. So I think all of our fellow municipalities, I know at the county level in discussions with the other treasurers, everyone's in the same boat. They're starting to look at this and you know, just see whether we're truly dealing with a cash flow problem or whether it's going to be an actual how much of a cash shortage. In terms of capital projects that I can speak to, in terms of where they're at, we had a couple in the IT department. We had a server that's been ordered and has not yet been delivered, but it's on its way. We had the council chamber microphones that we were going to replace with the hardwired in mics. Again, those have been ordered. There was, in terms of Victoria Hall itself, there was some work, small project to do with plastering, repairing the plaster in the east and west stairwells. So the east stairwell has been completed. We wanted to see how that went before we went ahead with the west. And of course, before we could get to that point, the contractors are now shut down. In terms of the big project, which was the front entrance to Victoria Hall and the sandstone repairs, that was tendered. We have those results back, and we have not yet brought a report to council in terms of a recommendation on awarding that tender. We also have not heard, part of that project was a grant submission that we put into Parks Canada for some potential funding. And we have been advised that all of their decisions have of course been delayed as well. So we're not, we don't know where that stands. There was another fairly large dollar project, waterproofing the elevator pits. That job's been completed. And the other project on my list was the office renovations or additions at Venture 13. And that project has also been completed. So if with that, I would turn it over to any of the other directors who want to comment on what project, the status of their projects.
Can we start with Director Huscrick, please?
Good evening, members of council. So I'll quickly walk through some of our key capital items. In parks, we had previously obtained quotes and we're ready to proceed on vehicle purchases, but we don't need the vehicles at this point, and we're thinking that there may be some added incentives as the auto industry ramps back up at some point later in the year, so we're holding on those. We've received, we've purchased the brush hog replacement. The playground equipment has been deferred since all playgrounds are currently closed. The Cooey Park development, we've had ongoing discussions with GRCA over some of the technical aspects. We're just about through those discussions, but of course all development is on hold at this time anyways. Water bottle filling stations, we're holding on that until an appropriate time. Spray pad, we've already purchased the equipment. The Peter Delonte tennis court resurfacing, we've received one quote, but we're also holding on that to determine how best to proceed. The directors have all had ongoing discussions about what's appropriate in this environment, what can be done safely, as well as what we can do to help the local economy and keep those types of jobs that are still operating going. So we're assessing sort of project by project what is appropriate. So Donegan Sea Diamond, that's certainly something we could probably do later this year, but again, we're waiting to see whether we're going to open facilities or when they'll be opened. Public washroom design is a fairly straightforward project. We can likely proceed with that because a lot of the design companies and engineering companies are working from home and continue to function. The outdoor fitness park, the government grant, we followed up with the government. They've extended the deadline for that grant by a year. So I think it's March of 2022 now, so that gives us more time. And then moving into waterfront operations, the East Pier project closed on March 24th. We received 3 submissions. We're in the process of evaluating those submissions at this time. The Harbour electrical system upgrade, we have been working with both the electrical contractor as well as Lakefront to ensure that we are going to procure a system that is properly and fully designed for future expansion of the waterfront. So Lakefront's been really helpful with that. There's equipment that may be needed, and they're willing to certainly provide us with what's needed, even on a temporary basis, in order to get that done. We've also been reaching out to contractors to find out their capacity to actually do this work in a safe manner, and I'm still waiting for a little bit more information on that, just to make sure that if we do proceed by issuing the RFP, which is almost completed, that it can be done safely and respecting the social distancing requirements, things like that. A couple of the others are the campground improvements, the Harbour improvements, phase 1. Those we're just waiting to deal with the East Pier first. Those projects are a little simpler than the East Pier, and we can certainly catch up. But those are a couple that we may very well proceed in the near future to issue RFPs and start that process so that we're able to move forward. The Harbour seawalls and breakwaters, that we're still waiting for the final reports on the condition assessments. We've been following up with the company, and all companies during this period are struggling to restructure, and so there's a lot of work that's diverting everyone from regular activities. So we're hoping to get those reports finalized shortly, and then we can assess whether to proceed with that. And then with the CCC, the street sign replacement is not a huge priority. Again, we're in discussions about where we're going financially and which projects are appropriate. So I mean, that's something we can proceed with at any time, but we've held off. The compressor is going to need to be done before the end of the year, and the video surveillance system is I think nearing completion. We've been working with IT. That's for both the CCC and the marina. So I think we've made some good progress, and we're prepared to move forward on any projects that we can.
I guess for the East Pier, the 3 submissions, you're evaluating those, and they will be coming to council probably, before you award any of those, correct, Director Husband?
That's correct.
Okay. Director Wills, do you have anything?
Yes, sure. I'll try to keep it brief. Obviously, see that Kerr Street was awarded and started, and we do intend to continue with that construction. That will be ongoing for the rest of the year. We have tendered Matthew Street, and I intend to have a report back to you next week regarding the award. We are going to proceed with this project. Now, it won't start until May, and we will have an agreement with the contractor that should it not be appropriate to start work, or we feel it's just not good timing, depending on the situation with the coronavirus, they've agreed to defer the project to next year if we feel that that's the best move, and they'll hold the same prices that they bid this year. So I think that's a safe one to move ahead with as well, and it's funded by OSIF and gas tax and sanitary reserve. Mostly, a lot of my projects are funded by gas tax and OSIF. So we are going to proceed with at least finishing the design and preparation of the tender packages. And then as those are completed, depending again how the situation is unfolding and how much remaining construction time there is left in the season, and based on our staffing levels, if we feel that it's appropriate to move ahead with tendering those projects, then we will at a later date. But that will be a sort of an ongoing monitoring situation, and we'll just continue to work on the designs of those. Things such as our traffic signals, street lights, and resurfacing type projects, those are more major repairs and maintenance that are also listed within the provincial list of essential works. So again, most of those are typical annual maintenance that we can continue to do. Our contractors are allowed to continue with those works because they're considered essential. So we will keep going with those and reminding them to follow safe working procedures. And then we have our parking meter replacements, transit shelters, and wheels replacement. Again, all these are funded by either the parking reserve or OSIF money or provincial and federal funding. That I see no reason why we can't go ahead with these, but they will not be proceeding until at least the summer, when I'm waiting for my transit employee to come back from maternity leave. So that does give us a few more months to consider those moving forward. But again, they're not tax-based either. And I think that's about it, unless there was any particular projects anyone had questions about.
I'll ask for questions in a minute. I guess, Glenn, you don't have much on your list, I don't imagine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are two updates, if I may. The Affordable Housing and Rental Housing Community Improvement Plan, which was a 2019 budget item, has proceeded to as far as we can, to the end of stage 2 of a 3-stage process. The next step is to hold the statutory public meeting of council, which at this point in time we have suspended, and we'll be pushing that off a little bit farther into the spring or summer. And as a result, the Affordable and Rental Housing CIP implementation funds, which were earmarked for 2020, they cannot be implemented, obviously, until the CIP is in place. The second item, the Integrated Community Sustainability Plan, which was earmarked for 2020. Currently, our staff are preparing an RFP for consulting services for that project. However, it will likely not be issued for this foreseeable future until we know more about the timing of this emergency, as this particular project involves a lot of group work, and that will be somewhat problematic if we proceed with that project right at this point in time. So, Madam Chair, those are the two items I can update you on.
Thank you very much, Director McGlashan. Any questions from members of council? That was a great overview, and I really appreciate all the time it took to put that forward. There's really, I mean, I know I read a motion at the beginning, but we've pretty much had the update. Oh, Mr. Davies, did you have something to add?
Yes, Deputy, I was just going to say maybe if Mr. Larmer could comment on his, it's not a capital project per se, but the records.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Larmer.
So we have completed our previous budget item, which was the $25,000 for the review of the classification approved by council. Policy procedures are complete. The only thing outstanding for that is our in-person training. That was for all staff and the onboarding of our full records classification management schedule. But I have done a lot of that work internally through in back ends of drives, and given some online training to to members of staff as well as directors for that process. So we are still working on that, going through it. In regards to the $154,000 project for the records management monetization program, I'm working on the RFP for that process to go through it. I was part of the management plan for that modernization for that electronic records management software position. Wasn't to go out until later in the fall anyway, so we're good. It actually gives me a little bit more time. So that one is still ongoing, and that was used part of the building efficiencies grants funding for that process. So that one is still proceeding. And then once I have filled, because we're kind of in a hiring freeze, our deputy clerk records coordinator, I won't be totally on that, but once that comes up, that will be the main projects to get that RFP out and to start getting that process to bring to council probably in the fall.
Thank you. Now we do have a motion on the floor. We've basically received the information that I was looking for. Mr. Larmer, can I go ahead and proceed with the vote because there is a motion on the floor, even though we've just completed what we've been asking? No. I don't know. That's not what we're looking for.
Apologize, I'm just trying to get the right one. I think the motion is still on the floor.
Yes, yes.
Can you read it again?
Sure.
If you think it's been answered, you can always withdraw that motion, or if you want a full report from the CAO bring forward, I think that's what the motion says. So you can decide if you move
Let's
it.
do that. If there are no other questions from members of council, then I'll just call the vote and just to keep council informed as we go forward with what's happening with, especially as we go forward to the third one, which relates to budget. So I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. And the last one is the moved by myself. The action recommended that council hold a special 2020 budget review meeting in early May 2020 to determine the status of revenues and expenses due to COVID-19 and what can be canceled, changed, or deferred to 2021 and beyond to address the shortfall we will experience without a tax increase. I'm just wondering, Mr. Davey, you spoke to this earlier with your meetings with directors. Do you have anything else to add to that?
No, not at this time, Deputy Mayor.
Okay, any questions from members of council? Mayor Henderson?
Yes, just to be clear from my perspective, Deputy Mayor, the reason I voted against your second motion, I felt all those components could have been certainly entailed or part of the 2020 budget deliberations, whether that means amendments, suggestions, referrals, deferrals, whatever it may be. I saw it as really one in the same, because if we are in fact talking about 2020 budget is very inclusive of all items. So I just want to be clear, for me, there could have been one in the same motion. So I just want to explain my position.
Thank you, Mayor Henderson. Basically, I just wanted to get council having this conversation, which we have had. Any other questions on putting forward a special budget review meeting so we can look at what we've heard now from the directors and what we will hear about operations as part of the budget going forward, because we will have to make some adjustments. Any other questions? Okay, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. That's it for general government, Your Worship.
Thank you. Over to you, Councillor Beatty. Planning and Development Services.
It would help if I turn my microphone on. Thank you, Your Worship. So first, we have a memo from the Director of Planning and Development regarding an application for site plan approval. This is a development agreement on Dodge Street in Cobourg for Loadstar Trailers, Inc. And the action recommended is that council authorize the preparation of a bylaw to be endorsed and presented to council for adoption at a regular council meeting, to authorize the mayor and the municipal clerk to execute a development agreement with 1978327 Ontario Limited and Lakefront Utility Services, Inc. for a new 1,784 square meter single-story light industrial office building and 112 square meter single-story accessory industrial building, subject to the finalization of details by municipal staff and applicable agencies. Are there any questions or comments from council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Moving along to item number 2, we have a memo from the Director of Planning and Development, and this is regarding an application for the site plan approval for 428 through to 432 King Street East in Cobourg, and this is at Brook Road North, King and Brook Inc., King and Brook East Inc., and Architecture. The action recommended is that Council receive this application for site plan approval for 428 to 432 King Street East, Cobourg, and refer the application to the Planning Department for a report. Any questions from members of Council? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed? And it's carried. Thank you very much. And the third is a notice of motion brought forward by myself regarding support for the Ontario Conservation Authorities. Please bear with me as it's a few paragraphs. The action recommended is whereas the town of Cobourg has recently declared a climate emergency, and whereas conservation authorities have been protecting the people and conserving and restoring watersheds with local community for over 50 years, and whereas the town of Cobourg is a beneficiary of the important work done by the Ganaraska Region Conservation Authority, the GRCA, and whereas the town of Cobourg is a member of the GRCA with representation on its board of directors, and whereas under the direction of the board of directors, the GRCA provides programs and services addressing local priorities to the residents of Cobourg, including the regulation of development in the river or stream valleys, wetlands, shorelines, and hazardous lands and associated allowances, watershed management, watershed stewardship, flood and erosion management, environmental education, source water protection, outdoor education and recreation, and the preservation of terrestrial ecology and fisheries. And whereas the province of Ontario is currently reviewing the mandate and operations of conservation authorities, and whereas conservation authorities provide essential services to municipalities in their watersheds, and whereas smaller municipalities do not have the capacity or the financial resources to employ such staff with the technical expertise that conservation authorities provide, therefore be it resolved that the town of Cobourg supports the conservation authorities and the contributions of the critical programs and services included in their mandate. And further that during the review and consultations by the Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks, the province continued to allow local municipalities designated representatives to determine which programs will be delivered and mandatory, along with the use of a board-directed fair municipal levy as per the current regulation. And further that the town of Cobourg encourages the province of Ontario to continue to support conservation authorities in the ongoing review and prioritize the allocation of adequate funding to support core mandate of conservation authorities, including the GRCA. And further that this resolution is forwarded to Premier Doug Ford, the Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks, the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry, MPP David Piccini, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, Conservation Ontario, Ganaraska Region Conservation Authority, and other Ontario municipalities. Just to add additional context to that, so this is similar, much more lengthier motion of support for Council to consider as we received by County Council earlier this year, as well as taking the lead to support other municipalities throughout the province that are declaring or demonstrating support for their respective conservation authorities. And much of this is in light of the public consultation process that the government of Ontario started undertaking earlier this year. Just in case Council would like to know, I did check to see where the public consultation currently was at. And on the government website, updated as of March 16th, 2020, over 2,200 comments have been received by the province. They are currently reviewing such submissions, and they have notified that they will be updating and sharing this with the public, obviously in the coming months. So the review is still underway, but obviously a little bit more prolonged given our current reality that we are all experiencing. So with that said, are there any questions or comments from members of Council? Wonderful. Seeing none, I would like to call a vote in support of the motion. Okay. All in favor and against? Oh, sorry. My apologies. I think I just asked twice. I will start again. My apologies. Members of council in support of the motion. Thank you. And against? Carried. Thank you very much.
Again, over to Public Works, Councillor Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Several motions here. The first one is a memo from the Director of Public Works. Don't do that to me. Where am I? Memo from the Director of Public Works regarding the proposed reduction in transit service for the town of Cobourg and the action recommended. I did make a modification on this one, though. See, Brent's putting it up, or Mr. Larmer's putting it up there now. Basically, I'll read the motion as it sits, unless Mr. Larmer puts it up. I don't want to change screens and pull my phone up or I'll lose it. The action recommended is that council approve a reduction in transit service to suit the current demand as per option B of the attached staff report, and delegate authority to the CAO to re-implement regular transit services incrementally or fully when required during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll open the floor up to questioning at this time. Okay, any questions in regard to this issue? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried.
Mr. Larmer, back to you. Sorry, actually, we're still in Public Works. I apologize. Councillor Darling.
Yes, thank you. Okay, item 2, again, is a memo from the Director of Public Works regarding the town of Cobourg flood mitigation and sandbag policy, PWOPS 1. The action recommended that council approve the proposed flood mitigation and sandbag policy for the town of Cobourg attached to the staff report as Appendix A. At this time, if I could, I'd like to ask Director Wills if she would comment on the rationale behind this and the dealings with the county and other municipalities. Director Wills, if you will.
Sure. So obviously this is an important topic that we've been discussing at we do have an intermunicipal public works committee. That's all of the lower tiers meet with the county, with our road supervisors and public works officials to discuss shared services and shared issues that are going around in all of our municipalities. And of course, this was an important topic that we created a subgroup to hash out, and we wanted to have sort of a united front across the whole county of be more consistent with what each of our policies should be or could be. So this is what we came up with. We wanted to have a very clear and simple message to help with during spring flooding events, because it is a confusing time when people are looking for answers. People are calling and asking what can be done and who does what and what are they supposed to do. So this policy was, as you can see, pulled together to state each of the different roles, including our town staff, public works, not just public works, but all town staff, and the fire department, EMS, as well as the mayor specifically, and Northumberland County, and then also a couple of bullet points about residential properties. Mostly what it does describe is municipal responsibility with, I like to sort of refer to it as a nuisance flooding. We're not talking major storm events where an emergency might be declared or somebody's health and safety might be in jeopardy. We're talking about, your regular spring thaw and flooding issues, small issues that are happening. So our municipal responsibility is to make sure that our infrastructure is operating properly, it's maintained properly so that we're not causing any flooding to adjacent private property owners. We're patrolling, we're clearing our culverts, we're keeping our drains clear, we're sweeping the roads to get debris off of the storm sewers. We're checking for ice blockages around our bridges, closing roads if necessary, notifying the public if there's conditions that are beyond our control, and advising, giving advice to residents of where they may be able to find sand and sandbags. And at this time, the supply of sand and sandbags are readily available at local supply stores. People can call ahead. We'd like to get the message across that it is best if you call ahead and make your orders, such as you would as at a landscaping company to order your topsoil in bulk. It can be dropped off versus you having to go pick it up. It's very difficult for us to put out a big pile of sand. People often don't have the abilities to go pick up a large amount of sand to bring back to their house in order to use it for sandbagging. So we've done that in the past, very little uptake, and it's more fair across the board because not all taxpayers need this service. That if you require sand and sandbags, then it's a very simple call to your local hardware store or contractor and have them deliver it for you, and perhaps even build the sandbag wall for you if you want to hire them to do that. But that is not what we're proposing municipal staff will be doing, whether it's materials or labor. And then of course, moving on to if it were an emergency situation where it's massive flooding, we're talking about the mayor potentially declaring an emergency such as we've already experiencing, and where the fire department and emergency medical services might get involved, depending on if somebody is at risk, their life and well-being is at risk. And then yes, if you're a property owner that regularly or even just one time is subjected to flooding on their property, it's not unlike any kind of maintenance that might happen at your house where a windstorm might blow part of your shingles off, or a tree gets knocked over and damages your house. It's a very similar situation where that is the requirement of the property owner to be responsible for paying for those damages to your own property or mitigating them, trying to prevent them if you see it coming, if you know that spring flooding is going to happen, being prepared for it, watching for bad weather that's upcoming, and just preparing to safeguard your own property is what we would like to get the message across as. So the county was going to bring this to their council in March about the same, I think it was the 18th, right at the exact time when this pandemic really hit. So they did not get that on their county council. We were hoping to have had them pass it before the flood home show that Shannon Murphy was trying to coordinate back on March 21st. So I wanted to make sure that this got in front of you as soon as possible because we are right in flood season right now, and we want to be able to provide that information to our residents before they start calling and asking for answers. You'll see at the, oh, not on here, there is a link that we're planning to put on our website for the, it's a Canadian military link video that shows how to properly construct a sandbag wall. And also there is a reference to, I believe it's the Lower Trent Conservation Authority that talks about roles and responsibilities of their conservation authority. Something that's not on here, speaking of conservation authorities, basically, as far as their role in this type of flooding is to maintain the flood warning and notification system. That's the GRCA. They provide us with memos when they know that the waters are rising, and they provide it to the mayor, they provide it to Public Works. I think everyone at the town gets this notification. So that is their sole responsibility, besides giving some advice if people were to call them. So we could add that as a responsibility on this policy as well. I think that about summarizes it. If there's any questions.
Okay, thank you, Director Wills. Is there any questions or comments in regard to this issue? Councillor Shirley, and then Mayor Henderson. Go ahead, Councillor Shirley.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to note that I had some technical difficulties on the previous vote. So I will raise my comments regarding transit when we deal with that issue next week. Regarding this draft policy, I did contact Sarah Delicate, who came to council last June to deliver a presentation as a representative of Shoreline, United Shoreline Ontario, and she had some very useful feedback about this draft policy, and I'll just share a few lines. Just give me a moment to pull it up. She felt that, in her opinion, the problem with the attached policy as it's written is that it downloads and relegates the most important piece of the emergency management framework to the stakeholder with the least amount of knowledge and capacity to do it. And she explained the huge amount of work required to actually build a sandbag wall. She also mentioned that a policy that essentially ends the municipality's responsibility with sharing information ignores the very real fact that there is zero chance that these residents can do it alone. They can't. And she says you are guaranteeing the need for response and recovery. And she emphasizes that mitigation is much more cost effective than response and recovery. And I think that's also my question. This draft policy is designed to address the situation outside of a declared emergency. So I'm wondering, if an emergency, a flooding emergency was declared, would the municipality then be in a position to provide response or sandbags? And if we can have some clarity on what our emergency plan says regarding flooding incidents.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shirley. If I may add to that, as you stated, this is not for emergency response. It'd be my understanding that your emergency response would be the same as it is currently, that once an emergency is declared, the emergency control group would come together and make those decisions at that time if there was an emergency declared. But maybe I could allow Mayor Henderson to comment on that if you would.
Well, thank you, Councillor Darling. The reason I put my hand up because we do have a unified working relationship with the county. I know the county was working on this when I first got appointed, but we have not yet seen what the county is doing from a county perspective, being the upper tier. And I know that COVID-19 put items behind. So based on that, I did send a memo to Warden Bob Sanderson and asked him when we can expect this to be on the agenda, because what I would like to learn, which I don't have the answer to, is what is the coordinated effect between the upper tier and the lower tier working together on mitigation strategies? Because I concur, if we don't do the mitigation, then as Councillor Shirley has said, then we're into the recovery part, which was another whole set of variables. I do not have that answer, and I've not seen anything from the upper tier. So at this point, I just want to make you aware that I did send that, and I'm awaiting hopefully a proactive position from the county, because within a month, as we all know, we're going to be in flooding season.
If I may, Mayor Henderson, is that for the emergency, like a declaration of an emergency? Or like, is this for what we're talking about here is for our public works doing their regular mitigation of flooding, like cleaning culverts, block bridges, that sort of thing? So these are two different issues.
Correct. And my understanding, it was very much hopefully talking about what you're talking about, or if it wasn't, then to your point, Councillor Darling, it would relate to the emergency side. But I haven't seen anything from the county to define which part of that would align with the town's position as presented versus the emergency side. So I would like to learn personally what the county is doing and how does that align with what we're doing. Because again, it's going to take all of us, I believe, to work together.
Okay, and my understanding, this is a draft policy that any suggestions we have would be taken back to the county and to the other municipalities to be discussed. Maybe I could ask Director Wills to elaborate on that. Director Wills.
Sure, thanks. So that would be the case. I would like to bring it back to the county so that we can share with the lower tiers as well. I know that that's a bit of a time-consuming way to go about, just given the time of year. We're into April now. And yes, I do want to clarify again that this is under non-emergency conditions. And it also we're not talking about mitigating shoreline flooding, shoreline erosion issues, much different case. You can't build a sandbag wall to block the lake and to stop erosion on the shoreline. But for for the water that might be creeping closer and closer to your house, you can see that coming, and there is the chance to be able to build these sandbag walls as necessary. And again, it's not unlike hiring a contractor to do any kind of work around your house. If you can get ahead of it, you know what's going to happen. You live on the lake, the water levels are rising very slowly, and they happen every year. You can get ahead of it and hire a contractor to come and build the sandbag wall properly around whatever facility it is on your property that needs to be saved, not the shoreline. That's going to get knocked down by the wave action. But so they're very different and complicated, or trying to keep it more simplified on the sense of not high lake level waters or erosion of your shoreline issues. Much different.
Thank you, Director Wills. Councillor Shirley.
Thank you. I do have some concerns about whether this is the best approach in terms of putting together an emergency management framework and providing support to residents. I don't see the urgency in the timeline in passing this policy because it simply doesn't offer any supports to residents. And the responsibilities outlined for the municipality are routine responsibilities which will take place anyways. I just want to mention that Sarah Delicate also shared with me the municipality of Clarington and the work that they've done to address flood-specific emergencies. They have put together a flood-specific emergency response plan. It was in 2017, and I've read it, and it's very interesting. It's got an important line in there, and that is that in their flood-specific emergency response plan, they give authority to the Community Emergency Management Coordinator, the CEMC. In our case, that would be the fire chief. And their plan literally says that the CEMC will determine the appropriate municipal response to a flood threat, and if warranted, deploy municipal resources to protect life and property. And I think that's really important in terms of timing. They essentially authorize the CEMC to take action if there's the threat of flooding. It's because sandbags need to be deployed before an emergency is declared, before a flooding emergency has taken place, when the water levels are a little bit lower, not when the water levels are already at flood level. And so I think that a flood-specific emergency response plan would be a better approach rather than a policy. And I believe that this was something that was promised to council June last year. And I'm just wondering what the status of that flood emergency response plan is.
I would have to go to the mayor on that one, as that would come through our emergency management. I don't know where we stand on any plan at this time, sorry.
That's right, Darlene. I would have to refer to the CAO because at this point that would be under the team led by Ms. Shannon Murphy and of course Chief Villeneuve. I don't know where that fully stands since that time, so I could not comment in all honesty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. CAO Davey, do you have any comments in regard to this issue?
No, my understanding is that we have an emergency plan. It's the one that we're following and using, and it's referred to as an all hazards, I believe is the terminology, emergency plan. It basically does exactly what Councillor Chorley is referring to, in the sense that if the fire chief or chief of police or someone determines that there's an event that's taking place that is of such significance to the municipality, then they would call the emergency operations center, put the emergency operations center into place, call out the emergency control group, and then that group again would meet, discuss the specific event that's taking place, and then again make recommendation to the mayor as to whether that event is of such significance that we need to declare a state of emergency, and then act accordingly. So I can certainly follow up with the fire chief and with the emergency planner and just have that discussion. But I believe that the emergency plan that we have now in place covers that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Davey. Councillor Shirley.
Thank you. I appreciate the response, but I do disagree with the response because I've read the town of Cobourg's emergency plan, including the annexes that were made available to me, and I've read the municipality of Clarington's emergency plan. And what they did was add an appendix. The entire appendix is a response plan for flooding. It's far more detailed than anything the town of Cobourg has. And as you said, yes, we've got an all hazards approach, a very generalized emergency response plan, but we have nothing specific for flooding. And when I've asked about what we have in terms of a response plan for flooding, I've been told that we would need to refer to other plans from other jurisdictions like the GRCA. When I've looked at the GRCA's feedback in terms of what they have for us, they've said actually it is the municipality's responsibility to manage their emergency response to a flooding incident. So we are getting, I think, into a situation where there's finger pointing in different directions. And at this stage, we know that we have sections of our municipality that are prone to flooding. We've been told by our emergency planner that yes, there is a need for a flood-specific emergency response plan, that was what council was told June last year. And I think now is the time to move forward with that, a much more comprehensive approach than the two-page policy that's in front of us today.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shirley. But I do agree with Director Wills here. This is a policy that's in place for the public works to do their regular flood control when you get high waters due to snow melting and whatnot, which isn't an emergency response. These are two different policies. And as far as an emergency response, I can agree with you, we may need to do some work on ours, but at this time, we're only dealing with the public works across the board with all the county public works departments agreeing on the level of maintenance they would be doing to mitigate any blocked culverts, blocked bridges, sort of flood control or a flood emergency is a totally separate policy. So I'd like to stay on track if I could and just deal with this policy at this time. We may have to bring this issue up with the CAO or the mayor and have our emergency planner delve into this a little deeper. Go ahead, Councillor Shirley.
Yeah, thank you. And just to clarify again, an emergency response plan can include and authorize individuals to take action even before an emergency is declared, so that mitigation approaches can take place. So we need to keep that in mind. And also this policy, again, for me, it includes responsibilities for the municipality, which would take place anyways. They're standard responsibilities for any municipality maintaining roads and culverts. So I would like to put an amendment on the floor. And the amendment is that the draft flood mitigation and sandbag policy be directed to staff for reconsideration and/or revision, and further that staff and the emergency planner prepare a flood response plan for council's consideration as soon as possible. And I haven't put a date on that, obviously, because we are already in a state of emergency, and I don't think it would be fair to put a deadline on that. But I do believe that we need to move forward with it because it was promised to council in June last year. And it's very important for the residents, particularly the residents along our waterfront.
Okay, is there any other comments from any other member of council? Okay, we have an amendment on the floor. If there's no comments in regard to the amendment, I'll call for the vote. As you remember, this policy is not an emergency policy, the one we're dealing with. So I'll just ask you to keep that in mind. Okay, Councillor Beatty.
Thank you, Councillor Darling. Before I ask my question, I think I saw the clerk have his hand up maybe, so I'm happy for him to speak first and then I
Okay.
can come back to my question.
I didn't see that. Thank you.
Sorry, I just want to clarify the amendment to Councillor Shirley, just regarding, is that replacing the full recommendation on the floor? It's replacing the wording there, or addition to?
It's replacing it.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, any further comments? Councillor Beatty?
Thank you. Sorry, I would like to still ask my comment or question, possibly through you, Chair, to the CAO, because the interim CAO, Davey, I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Chorley about how we have to have a more detailed annex in our general hazard emergency plan that specifies specifically with flood management. And I know I was keen after we received the delegations last June that was going to be forthcoming through the appropriate channels. I'm torn though, because I'm also hearing from our Director of Public Works as an inter-county body, and then through that this isn't a policy that is associated with the emergency plan. So I'm wondering if, through you, Chair, to the interim CEO, Davey, I could just ask out of curiosity, what would be a measure in which we could take to satisfy Councillor Chorley's objective with diving deeper into our emergency plan that shows flood preparedness, flood prevention, and flood management?
CAO Davey, if you will.
Yes, through the chair to the councillor. I think that's certainly something that can be tasked to the emergency planner to come up with the specific hazard, whether it's an appendix or an annexation. I think one of the things that needs, the direction that needs to come from council is that if individuals own property, whether it's along, and the issue again with the lakefront properties it's not really an issue of flooding, it's an issue of erosion because of the high water levels in the lakes. The people that have flooding issues in the town of Cobourg are more people that have properties along the creeks that tend to flood. I think the direction that council needs to take is, are those property owners responsible for protecting their own properties and for the work that's required to protect those properties? Or is council starting to give direction that the municipality is to take responsibility for protecting those properties? So those are two very, very fundamentally different functions and roles that council could be directing staff. And I think the purpose of this policy was to say, we'll certainly, the municipal role will be to assist those property owners with guidance and that sort of thing. We're not probably going to send a crew down to fill sandbags and build a sandbag wall. I think if that's the direction that council is heading, that's a completely and fundamentally different approach to this, dealing with just people that own properties along the creeks.
Thank you, Mr. Davey. Councillor Chorley.
It's an interesting point raised by interim CAO Davey, but I think we should keep in mind that when I read through the flood response plan for the municipality of Clarington, it's not necessarily that the municipality is taking full responsibility for providing sandbags and the full cost of the sandbags, but there are other things in there that we can do. It could be that at times we need to deploy sandbags, or it could be that at times the municipality can help to organize teams of volunteers who are willing to help fill and deploy sandbags. So the municipality, there are other options and other things that we can do. And again, I feel that the draft policy that's in front of us really doesn't provide any support whatsoever to residents. There are other supports that we can provide. And this policy essentially absolves the municipality of any responsibility in terms of delivering or distributing sandbags or materials this year. I think that the amendment that I've put on the floor is not to abandon this policy completely, but to send it back to staff for revision. The other concern I have with this policy is that it makes no mention of mitigation approaches for protecting municipal property. For example, the waterfront in front of the Marina building is prone to flooding. There are no details in this policy about the municipality deploying sandbags or other mitigation approaches to protect that municipal property, under what conditions that would happen, for example. So I think there's more that can be done if this policy is going to have legs. And there are also other things we can do in terms of our emergency management framework.
Thank you, Councillor Shirley. I just want to make it clear that there's two issues here. And the one is shoreline erosion and the other is flooding. And I realized when Clarington and Brighton, when they implemented those policies for sandbags and protection of property, they're because actual residents are being flooded. The lake level comes up. These properties were built prior to the GRCA passing all their policies where they should and shouldn't build in floodplain. These places were built in floodplains. They're legal non-conforming, but it's the actual houses that are being protected. They're building sandbag walls around the houses to protect the house. As far as trying to stop Lake Ontario waves and protect the shoreline with sandbags is a physical impossibility. So I think we've got to clarify those two points. Are we trying to prevent flooding of somebody's house? Or are we trying to put up a makeshift wall that's going to try and stop Lake Ontario's huge wave surge? And that's not going to happen. So I think council really has to take a hard look at this and say, if you own property along the lakeshore, it's going to get the damage unless you build a proper rock retaining wall or wave wall as per GRCA's engineered plans. You have an engineer come in, design a wall that will protect your property. Otherwise, sandbags are not going to do it. So I think, and again, this is an emergency management policy, where this policy we have in front of us is for public works. So I think they're two different issues. I agree with CAO Davey that we could task emergency management officer to look into this further. But at this time, okay, I don't know, we've had enough discussion on it. Is there any further comments? Okay, at this time, then I'm going to call the vote on the amendment, on Councillor Chorley's amendment. So at this point, all in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Okay, the amendment is defeated. Okay, I'll call the vote on the action item that was first read for the motion. All in favor? Opposed? It's carried.
Okay, Mr. Larmer, back to you.
Yes, Your Worship. So we have unfinished business items are listed in the agenda. You'll see, I apologize if you read the agenda earlier. I did forgot to put the motion that was passed at the last council meeting by Councilor Shirley regarding the amendments to all those items from our May 11th. That's been corrected. So I have that corrected on there. The only other session we have is the Committee of the Whole open forum. And we have received two submissions from members of the public for Committee of the Whole open forum. The two members of the public has emailed myself as clerk through clerk@cobourg.ca. They didn't want to participate or go through the electronic ways and options for it. So what they've done is allowed me to read it to council, and I think both they're at probably the 5-minute mark. So if you allow me to, Your Worship, I'll read the first one. then we can go through it just like I'm the individual appearing before council as the reader, and then we'll go and deal with the second one if that's okay. So, Your Worship, members of council, we have an email submission for committee open forum from Philip Carnell. And I'm going to read it word for word from Philip Carnell. So, dear Sir, Madam, members of council, my name is Philip Carnell, and I reside at 164 Bagot Street in Cobourg. Please find enclosed my statement, Twitter, which I request to be read during the open forum at the April 6, 2020 Committee of the Whole. Thank you in advance. Dear Your Worship, members of council, my name is Philip Carnell. I'm a homeowner in Cobourg and a local lawyer. I write out of concern for the governance of our town and the public's right to be informed during these unprecedented times. One does not need to go far to be inundated with conflicting news from a variety of sources, and many times the information that is received changes on a day-to-day basis. One would hope that our towns and elected officials would be a reliable source of information. However, this is made impossible when the source of that information is obscured from the public. Presently, our town and province are under a state of emergency, which certainly calls for greater authority and power to be vested in our elected officials than what would be appropriate in normal times. That being said, the right to know what laws are being passed and how they may impact our day-to-day lives ought to be abridged. At present, new restrictions are being placed on our citizens on a daily basis. Unfortunately, the only notice that is being provided of these changes are the often conflicting news releases of our municipality, province, and various service providers. For example, the province has announced that in certain designated restricted fire areas, certain types of outdoor fires are prohibited. This is noted that Cobourg is not within the enumerated restricted fire area. Rightfully so, the Northumberland Council of Fire Chiefs has indicated that there is presently no fire ban in the county of Northumberland or the municipalities. That being said, the Cobra police have indicated on their website under a news release dated April 6, 2020, entitled Cobra Police Service Enforces Penalties for Failure to Comply with Emergency Orders, that because COVID-19 is easily spread, what has been done? A provincial fireman is in effect in Ontario. This is simply not true. There's also this is also concerning, as under section 7.0.11 sub 1 of the Emergency Management Civil Protection Act, every person, this is a quote from the act, every person who fails to comply with an order under subsection 7.0.2 sub 4, or who interferes with or obstructs any person in the exercise of powers or the performance of a duty conferred by an order under that subsection is guilty of an offense and is liable to conviction. A, in the case of an individual subject to clause B, to a fine of not more than 100,000 and for a term of imprisonment of not more than 1 year. As such, it would appear that in the present instance, the Cobra police have indicated that they, under penalty of criminal sanction, and with all the highlighted authority that has been conferred upon them, will be enforcing a non-existent fire ban. Perhaps even more concerning is how and why the Cobra police have come out about this misinformation. Based upon the town's community management plan, it is unclear. Another such example would be the closure of our parks. Under OREG 104/20 emergency order under subsection 7.0.2 sub 4 of the Act, closure of outdoor recreational amenities pursuant to the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, section 4 provides that, for greater certainty, nothing in this order precludes individuals from walking through or using portions, and he's underlined this, emphasis is mine, of park and recreational areas that are not otherwise closed and do not contain an outdoor recreational amenity described in subsection 2. As such, based upon the provincial legislation, there is nothing to preclude an individual from having a picnic in the park with their spouse or bird watching or fishing, etc., provided they are not in a group of more than 5, maintain social distances, and are not otherwise using an outdoor recreational amenity. Despite this, the town's website, under the March 31st, 2020 news release entitled Town Closes All Outdoor Recreational Spaces During COVID-19 Pandemic, provides that Green spaces in parks, trails, and ravines can remain open. 4, underline, pass-through access only. Emphasis is mine, he states. And visitors must maintain practice social physical distancing of at least 2 meters apart from others. At present, it is unclear as to how the town has restricted access to the parks to an extent greater than that imposed by the province. If a bylaw was passed to this effect, it is unknown. If an emergency order has been issued pursuant to the town's emergency management plan, it is unknown. If the town has misinterpreted the provincial legislation, it is unknown. Of greatest concern is this unknown. Presently, under the town's emergency management plan, based upon the only version readily available online, privilege under the Municipal Freedom Information Protection and Privacy Act is acclaimed for annexes 1 to 5 and 7 inclusive, while annexes 6 and 8 to 12 are just simply not provided. These annexes govern matters such as what notification is to be provided, what is considered a vital service, and most importantly, what are the duties and responsibilities of the community control group. In addition, it does not appear that the community control group provides minutes of their meetings, nor have they published orders or directives for the broader public. It seems that the public must be content to receive news releases, which, as indicated above, can be misleading or contradictory. From a cursory review of the town's emergency management plan, the Municipal Freedom Information Protection and Privacy Act, and the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, there does not appear to be any basis upon which the community control group can conduct closed meetings or make orders in secret. On the contrary, during these unprecedented times, the public's right to information and the need for transparency is all the more greater. Given people's fears and concerns, a situation where a rumor such as Cobourg has closed Canadian Tire or Cobourg has closed the hospital spreads with wild abandon would not be a stretch of the imagination. Further, given the unprecedented powers given to law enforcement and the criminal sanctions that can result from violation of Section 7.0.111 of the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, it is imperative that the public be made aware of the legislation restrictions that impact them and their always essential charter rights. This last paragraph. As such, it is asked that Council, whether they will require publication of Annexes 7 through 12 of the town's Emergency Management Plan, ? It is asked of Council whether they will require publication of the agenda and minutes of all community control group meetings, ? It is asked of Council whether they will require the publication of all orders, directives, decrees, etc. of the community control group, and that they be posted in the exact language in which they are passed or signed, ? Lastly, it is asked of Council whether they will require that the community control group meetings be broadcasted in a manner similar to council meetings. All of which is respectively submitted. Philip M. Carnell, barrister and solicitor. Your worship, that one, so you can put that on the floor to questions if you want, Council.
Okay, I'll start with Councillor Shirley.
Yeah, I was just wondering if the clerk would be so kind as to repeat the asks at the end so I could just make note of them one more time.
By all means, Mr. Larmer.
It is asked of Council whether they will require publication of Annexes 7 through Town of the Town of Cobourg Emergency Plan, ? It is asked of Council whether they will require publication of the agenda and minutes of all community control group meetings, ? It is asked of Council whether they will require the publication of all orders, directives, decrees, etc. of the community control group, and that they be posted in the exact language in which they were passed or signed. Lastly, it is asked of Council whether they require the community control group meetings be broadcasted in a manner similar to council meetings. All of which is respectfully submitted. And I will make sure that this gets posted on the agenda when I follow up with the actual member of the public if he wishes for that. We can make it part of the record, just because obviously this is a little different situation in regard to committee open forums through me reading it.
I'll go to Deputy Mayor and then back to Councillor Shirley.
Just through you, Mayor Henderson, through the clerk, will we be getting a copy of both submissions?
Yep, of course. I just have to follow up with the individual, but of course.
Okay. Councillor Shirley.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say that I appreciate this feedback from Mr. Cornell, and I do share some of the concerns that he's expressed about the need for transparency. When I was studying politics as a student at university, I studied in the aftermath of 9/11, a period of time where there were long, lingering emergency measures and reduced civil liberties. And I think we really need to continue to strive to have open, transparent, and accountable decision-making, even during a state of emergency. And there are some good suggestions that he's made in his asks in terms of if it's possible to publish Annex 7 through 12 of the emergency plan. I have been asking to access those annexes and review them. I haven't had access to all of them as yet. The publishing of minutes and an agenda for the emergency control group, I think, would be a good way to make decision-making more open and more transparent. And the publication of all orders would also help to clarify where directives are coming from and help us to make sure that the messaging is consistent. And I know it's challenging because there are so many orders and directives coming out at this time from different levels of government. But I think those are really good suggestions, and I would be in support of that. I also have some confusion over which decisions or issues are brought to the emergency control group and which ones are brought before council. And I think it's important to note that the provincial government moved very quickly to amend the Municipal Act to allow electronic council meetings. And that was precisely because the provincial government saw the value of having local elected officials continue to govern during this crisis. So obviously my inclination is to see as much decision-making come through this council and council business as normal as possible during this period. And that's particularly because at this point we can see the trajectory of this crisis. It's not a short-term crisis. It's going to be a very prolonged crisis lasting many months. So we need to think about how are we going to make decisions in an open, accountable, transparent way, even though we are currently under a state of emergency.
Thank you for that. Councillor Beatty.
Thank you, Councillor, or my apologies. Thank you, Your Worship, Your Worship. I think, Deputy Mayor, did you have your hand up before I? And if so, I'm happy to wait.
No, I believe I addressed the answer to Deputy Mayor about getting a copy.
Oh,
So
right.
back to Councillor Beatty.
Sorry, I'm trying to focus and look at the screen. Thank you, Your Worship. I echo some of the points highlighted by the citizen as well as Councillor Shirley. I think we went through this topic a little bit at our special meeting, so I don't want to get into regurgitating that. However, I'm wondering if there are opportunities, understanding certain things are considered privilege. I follow our news releases and direct the public to those as a summary of decisions that have been made. I wonder if part can be added to the website where it's, I don't know, if it is a summary of orders or a summary of updated, I know they're not bylaws, but updated decisions made, because sometimes a more defined list, for example, what the clerk read out to us earlier, is a lot more detailed and finite and consistent with provincial communication than our wonderful press releases, which are written more for a public notification communique. And then further to that, again, I wholeheartedly appreciate the daily briefings that we're getting from the mayor on behalf of the EOC. And I know that that takes an extra amount of time to prepare at the end of busy days. I don't know if there's an opportunity to write that in a way that it can be received publicly or shared publicly as part of a daily roundup, a daily wrap up. I know I'm probably making suggestions that are adding additional ways of communicating and publishing on the website and social media, but I'm wondering if that's some immediate way to not only to help address clarification, but to add an additional layer of transparency and just to I think really what we're hearing from citizens is they just want to feel connected and informed so that they have a fulsome understanding of what they can and cannot do in the town during this time.
Okay, perhaps what I might suggest, it would be worthwhile for all of us to get that copy, to reread it. If you have questions, please filter them both to myself and to Mr. Larmer. There are a lot of components to the submission by Philip and very honorable comments. And it will be our role to work through those questions and bring back to you. I'm sure in some parts we'll have to get legal opinion. We'll have to take this to the emergency control group as well. What is based on their interpretation, and again, could be based on legal, because ultimately what we're trying to do at the end of the day is to ensure same communication to all, whether that be to council members, to the public. So I would ask you, once you read that again, submit questions you may have, and we will certainly work through those. And there's no doubt we will have to bring those back to rightfully answer Mr. Knorr on his response. Sorry, Councillor Darling. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. No sound?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Keep forgetting to turn that mic back on. Just with some of his questions here, I'm just wondering, again, you mentioned go to legal counsel, but would some of those questions, the answers require changes to legislation because we are in a declared emergency?
Again, he raised a number of questions, but I'd have to have discussions with Mr. Larmer, with our CAO, perhaps with legal counsel on some points, as well as members of the ECG, because the author of this has raised a number of issues. I don't have all the answers because I'm only listened tonight as you did. I didn't have the copy before me.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this time? At this point, Mr. Larmer, perhaps we will have to certainly receive it for information purposes, knowing that we will work towards giving a response to the questions asked.
Okay, yeah, to your worship, there's a number of items in this that can be a bit confusing. You know, we have almost 3 bylaws passed by council from 2012 to 2015. We have one piece of legislation, and we have the regulation that deals with it, which tells us what we can and cannot do under regulation. We also have a number of other orders, about 24 of them. So there's a number of things, and I can see how it can be confusing because just it is an unprecedented global pandemic of a public health crisis that we've never seen before. So things are changing and legislation is different at different times. So I think I can work with the interim CAO on creating some kind of analysis of all the different things and putting together a summary and maybe issuing that out.
Okay, thank you.
So just the second one, your worship.
Thank you.
So this one is regarding the town of Cobourg's flood mitigation and sandbag policy. And this is from Dorothy Langhorn, 91 Ontario Street. And I just want to make mention that I apologize. This the first one was received at 5:27 p.m. and then also this one was received at 5:38 p.m. So they're before the 6 p.m. deadline for submission to me based on that. So from Dorothy Langhorn, I own shoreline property in the town of Cobourg at 91 Ontario Street that was flooded in 2017 and 2019. I am writing to you today to express my concern regarding this flooding and requesting that this issue be addressed through your current work on flood mitigation along the beach for the town of Cobourg. I contacted the Ganaraska Conservation Authority on December 4th, 2019, who in turn involved the planning department of the town of Cobourg. While we are still awaiting conclusions, it appears as though the source of flooding on our property relates to several matters. Point 1, new development of Cedarmore Avenue, Tay Street, Ontario Street are leading to more drainage onto our property and onto Cedarmore Avenue. Point 2, The stormwater drainage for Cedarmere Avenue and all the drainage that leads to it outfalls to the beach at the end of Cedarmere Avenue. There is no municipal system in place to capture this outfall. Point 3. The high lake levels mean that the water table is exceedingly high and there is very little absorption of this outfall from Cedarmere into the ground, leading to ponding and overland water flow. Point 4. A berm has developed halfway up the beach, which is preventing this overland water flow from draining to Lake Ontario. This water is flowing eastward along the beach and onto our property. Point 5. It is possible that this is further excavated by the town's boardwalk, which blocks the conveyance of this water further eastward away from our property. As I noted, we experienced flooding in recent years. Our discussions with the Ganaraska Conservation Authority have been helpful. It was suggested that excavating a stormwater channel from the end of Cedarmere Avenue through the current sand berm on the beach to Lake Ontario could be a possible solution. Conservation Authority representatives indicated that there are similar situations along the beach in other locations and that they would likely be supportive as a staff of allowing a permit for this kind of work for all of these locations in the town. Recognizing that the beach changes from time to time, this permit would allow for ongoing maintenance to maintain these channels in operating order. I am requesting that our current flooding problems and the potential solutions being considered by the Ganaraska Conservation Authority be incorporated into the town of Cobourg's flood mitigation and sandbag policy. Would you please acknowledge receipt of this correspondence and forward it to the most appropriate staff to work with us accordingly? With regards, Dorothy Langhor of 91 Ontario Street, Cobourg, Ontario.
Okay, thank you. Again, we'll ensure that that copy as presented and written by Ms. Langhorn is given to other members of council. And then again, as she requested, I think it's then better to decipher all the many components within this. And the reason I say that, because I've heard words like Ontario Street, which I know is her property, talking about Cedarmere, which is the far end, and then yet talking about a berm on the lakeshore. So there are a number of components. So I would ask that you would submit any questions you may have as council, so we can best determine who this may go to, whether it's planning, public works, GRCA, or otherwise, because again, there are many components as I'm listening within this letter. Mr. Larmer, do you have any other comment?
No, Your Worship, that's the only two I've received, and I appreciate the public submitting those before the 6 o'clock period. We didn't receive any other ones after that 6 o'clock, so I hope it worked okay for everyone.
Okay, and if I may, I ask a bit of latitude from the clerk. I will ask the same from council. I just want to make a statement what we're going through. I do want to say to the good citizens of Cobourg, thank you for following our message that we've been on behalf of council and senior staff and first responders and trying to get the message. And it's very common one. It's to stay home, stay safe, and let's come together by staying apart. And the one number I like to read to you, because I know that many citizens are starting to use this number, but the town put out a public inquiry line to help with any questions you might have. So I'd like to read that number carefully once again, in case you don't have it. It is 289-677-0585. And I'd also like to thank those many citizens who've gone onto the town's Rapid Notify to help with any kind of emergency. I spoke to Miss Shannon Murphy, and at last note, we had over 12,000 hits. So that's a very promising message. So again, I just want to encourage our good citizens. If you have questions, please use those resources, and we'll do our very best to assist you in whatever way we can. And Mr. Larmer, thank you for allowing me a little bit of latitude on that comment. I believe if there are not any other questions from members of council, are there any others? Deputy Mayor, your voice.
Just one, Your Worship. I'm wondering how many people, Mr. Larmer, do you know, are following us this evening? Any idea?
Yeah, I last checked and we had 12.
Okay. I guess those are all your friends, Adam. I just wondered what is being done to aren't online, that don't have Twitter, that don't have Facebook.
Sorry,
Are we getting the message? Sorry.
just repeat it again. You just froze up, Deputy Mayor.
Okay. I'm just wondering what is being done to let our senior citizens and people that aren't online and don't have email and don't follow our council meetings, other than the 12 that are, how do they get that number you just gave us? And how do they get the messaging that you're trying to get out there? I mean, what are we doing to let other citizens that are at home, that haven't gone anywhere, and other than their local newspaper, they have no way of getting that message?
Mr. Larmer or Mr.
No.
David?
Oh, I was actually asking you.
Well, I'll take it to the team because that's something we're working on as a team premise.
Okay.
So I would just add that basically the press releases, there's the newspaper ad that goes in, various other methods of communication that are being considered. We did also do the rapid notification that went out to, I believe it was 12,000 some odd people that have signed up for that service to get that information. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways that the message is getting out there.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Larmer, do you wish to say anything? Because I know you work with communications as well. And we did look at, to your point, Deputy Mayor, we did look at in time, depending on Canada Post and where they are, do we do a full mail out to citizens based on zoning, which we can do. But at this point in the interim, as you've noted, we've highlighted the rapid notify. We put in the emergency public inquiry line. And as you know, we're updating for those that can get access in some way. Everything that is happening, we're putting it out as fast as we can do it through social media. But your point's well taken. We may find we're also getting information out through Lucy and Louie and their payments. Messages are getting out that way with bills as well. So we may find we have to maybe choose a time after so many weeks when information builds, maybe a Canada Post mailing out.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Are there any other questions from members of council? Seeing none, I believe that brings this portion to adjournment. So I will call for adjournment.
Very rare. Should we just have a motion for closed session?
Pardon me?
Just a motion for closed session.
Yes, and as you know, just a reminder, we have to go out of this session to go to the next one. And I just want to encourage you and thank you for following the confidentiality rules of closed sessions. And I also want to thank you to ensure that when we go through this session, that as in your different locations, that no one is really within the room with you or can hear components of that closed session, because I know we have to treat it as if we're in our normal location. And for all that you're doing, I thank you. So we'll give you a few moments perhaps to go out to take a break. Maybe
Sorry, Your Worship, I have to read the motion before we do that.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just didn't want us all to disappear. The council meeting closed session in accordance with section 239 2C of the Municipal Act 2001 regarding S 239 2C, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board. 1, municipal property lease agreement of municipal space.
Okay, thank you. Seconder, not seconder, all in favor? Again, Mr. Larmer, I'm going to allow perhaps for a 3-5 minute window for washroom break before we proceed to members of council and staff for the next session. And I'll call for adjournment. Councillor Barreau,